In the massive outpouring of grief and mourning after the October 1st massacre at the Route 91 Country Music Festival in Las Vegas, Nevada, impromptu memorials sprang up along the Las Vegas Strip and elsewhere in town. Most of those were on private property, were relatively small, and lasted only a week or so. On October 5th, Greg Zanis placed 60 crosses, 58 for the victims and a beginning and ending cross, on an S-shaped rise behind the Welcome to Las Vegas sign. Put pictures up here so you can kind of see what they started out as. You know, this is kind of like before everything else happens too. The speed of this was facilitated by a volunteer crew that Zanis uses, who construct the crosses with donated materials, which Zanis then drives across country. On October 2nd, the day after the massacre, a group in Hawaii that had made Leis for the Paris bombing and for the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting decided that Las Vegas needed an even longer lay. Previous ones had been a mile long. But because Las Vegas is often called the Ninth Island, for the number of Hawaiians who visit here and for the number of who have moved here, they decided that Las Vegas should get a 2-mile long way. So the story of the Leis and the crosses exemplifies an incredible amount of background work engendered in documenting and preserving the tragedy by local museums and archives. So I started this research because it was clearly a watershed moment in Las Vegas. As I said before, no one in my department was doing anything about it. I also have extended contact with the county museum because my husband is its director. So I started looking at the research on impromptu memorials, from roadside crosses to ghost bikes to the train station bombings in Madrid. What I ended up discovering was that the weird, unusual kind of, isn't that strange, isn't that interesting, patterns turned out to be part of consistent patterns across the United States and Europe. Examples of this are locations overlaying existing tourist sites. So I have an example of Princess Di down here in the corner. The impact on public property, the repertoire of stuff that's left behind, self-appointed guardians, graffiti layering, tragedy tourists leaving objects without regard for what happens to them, souvenir snatching, and museum folk dealing with survivors. Even having some of the memorial catch fire. Turns out happened at Columbine crosses. Margry and Sanchez Caritano defined the start of the impromptu memorials as beginning in the 1980s with items and notes left at the Vietnam Memorial, which became the generic template for the United States. Intentional collecting by museums also began from the Vietnam Memorial as well. Also beginning in the 1980s, has been noted that roadside memorials, just the individual crosses at the site of accidents, for instance, spread north from Catholic areas of southeastern Europe to the rest of Europe and north from Mexico into the southwestern United States and then outward from there. So, within a few days of the massacre, museums and other organizations in town met to discuss how they would document this event. Their intention is to divide up responsibility based on location of memorials, different collection policies, and available resources. For example, special collections at the UNLV Library has a person specializing in metadata who's been gathering related tweets, numbering somewhere in the millions at this point on this. The State Museum has taken responsibility for City of Las Vegas memorials, stuff at UNLV and the Mandalay Bay site. The County Museum is collecting things from the impromptu Reno Avenue and Welcome to Las Vegas sites, both of which are on county land. And so this just kind of shows you some of the interesting and strange things that are going on. This was a note at UNLV. The billboards along the strip with Mandalay Bay in the background. And this is the Memorial Garden downstairs, downtown, with this lovely little batch of, it's October, right? With this lovely little batch of mini pumpkins that have been hand decorated as examples of stuff. Now think about collecting this stuff and preserving it, if possible. So the county's portion is based on an early directive from Steve Sisolak, the chair of the Clark County Commissioners, giving Greg Zanis a hug here, that the county museum would take the crosses and the accompanying stuff. That decision was quickly reiterated by Chris June Kiliani, the vice chair. There's the one in the red shirt there. Both of them are running for governor this year, so there's a possibility, maybe, that there might be some political posturing involved in this. Of course, as they were doing this, how this would be done, who would do it, its impact on the museum, how it would be paid for, were not part of their decision. As of 4 months later, so far no action has been taken by the county commissioners to underwrite their decisions. The objects were on county property at a place frequented 24/7 by tourists under normal circumstances to take pictures in front of the Welcome to Las Vegas sign document. I was here. So, but there's no security or tracking of individual objects that is possible there. Legally, all the objects were considered abandoned property, and the responsibility of county maintenance to clean up. Had it been at a cemetery, there would be staff and procedures for periodically cleaning of the grounds. The Vietnam Memorial has gone through a variety of different kinds of policies over the years on what they're going to do with the stuff that has been left there. But at least here, the county museum had county maintenance people to help on this, who overall just did a heroic job in novel and traumatic situations. Contrast that to the memorial site in Orlando, where museum staff became responsible for site cleanup, including blood, broken glass, candle wax, and all the other detritus. Not exactly within their normal job description on this. So, the lay for Las Vegas, proper name, the lay of Aloha for Las Vegas was organized by Ron Ponzo at Nalu's restaurant on Maui, also where the Paris and Orlando lays were organized from. According to Ponzo, the lay is a vehicle to send love and prayers and hope for healing for the whole community. But this took an extraordinary piece on beyond something they hadn't done before. There were people on 4 islands gathered sacred tea leaves and twisted the lays. Estimates are it took 20 truckloads of tea leaves and 1,000 people who made a 2-mile-long lay in 4 days. After the individual lays were made, they were connected into strands about 50 feet long. You can see this here, and the groups of 8 were twisted together into mass lays about 5 inches in diameter. And you can kind of see here what these twisted batches of lays look like as they're being carried to the Welcome to Las Vegas sign. The lays were then loosely coiled and placed in plastic tubs for transportation to Las Vegas. On Saturday, October 14th, the main part of the lay was laid on the crosses and wrapped around palm trees between the welcome sign and the line of crosses. And so you can kind of see all of this process here. A second part of the lay was taken to Mandalay Bay, the hotel where the shots came from. And a third section went to the Healing Garden near downtown Las Vegas, about 10 miles away. In addition, Ron Ponzo was contacted by people in Bakersfield, California, some of whom were survivors of the music festival, but they wanted to be part of the healing too. So another piece that aired out in this. Leilani and Lonnie Howard created a Letters of Love for Lei of Las Vegas campaign where people could send them 3x5 cards with messages. One website noted about Letters of Love that they were a, quote, low effort but powerful way to give back, unquote. Perhaps 500 cards were numbered, laminated, hole punched, and threaded with a gold pipe cleaner. The portion of the lei that went to the healing garden had many of the letters attached to it before it was wrapped around the central tree in a heart-shaped planter. Here, you can kind of see the planter up in the top. The rest of the cards were attached to the 58 small trees, one for each victim, surrounding the tree and surrounding the nearby remembrance wall. Reading a few of these demonstrate how much people intended to convey their caring and sorrow while still being fairly generic. Thinking of you, Las Vegas. Prayers for the victim. Sometimes they got a tad confused. My favorite one, which is down in the corner here, that says, sorry for what happened. I hope you're okay, R.I.P. And I'm thinking in this, it was probably aimed at two different audiences, but just ended up being confusing, because my response was, if I'm dead, I'm not okay, but thanks for your concern. Because Leis connecting the crosses would periodically catch fire. Let's see if I have myself here. There was an unofficial guardian at the Welcome to Las Vegas site, and he eventually ended up hiding fire extinguishers among all the stuff at the base of the crosses. How they can be preserved, however, is another question entirely. The Orlando Museum was not able to save any of their lei, nor most of the teddy bears and other stuffed animals there. Rain and general humidity caused the stuffed animals to become mold and mildew-ridden, while the leis became infested with spiders. One of the people here who was arachnophobic said, spiders? Why did it have to be spiders? Paraphrasing Indiana Jones. Once the leis got to the county museum and they were taken down early because they kept catching fire, they were coiled in large plastic bags and left outside and open to air and dry. Here you see them on the loading dock there. And down below is just a sample of the lei in Orlando. Also, while they were open, they emitted a distinctive odor. I didn't know how to describe it. I went online to find it, and somebody said it. They were described as smelling like burning rubber. Okay. Online sites suggested besides drying that they try freezing the lei. I don't know how you try to freeze 2 miles of lei. So the county museum has taken some of the lei and frozen it just in case the large sections simply dry out and crumble or turn to goo in terms of this. So that's kind of, last time I looked, they were still drying out on the loading dock. Okay, this is kind of what happened to the crosses in this. Greg Zanis has been making crosses for years and estimates that he's made over 22,000 crosses. They are not without controversy, as noted in Susan Brighter's article about the Columbine and Northern Illinois University crosses. Further things about the Sutherland crosses that we've seen since Las Vegas as well. But I couldn't find any documentation of it. In Orlando, there were a variety of issues because of the number of the LGBT community targeted at the nightclub that had been rejected by their religion of origin and by their families because of being gay. Others were non-religious and a number were Jewish, yet all had their names written on white crosses, which Everett sees as part of a broadly Christian American civil religion. The counterpoint here was, and I've got a picture of it down in the corner here, white painted stars of David were laid by the 2 known Jewish victims' crosses in Las Vegas by visitors, not by Xanax. Over the time the crosses were at the welcome sign, they became virtually invisible under their load of flags, balloons, rosaries, Mardi Gras beads, flowers, stuffed animals, notes, and other trinkets. The southernmost third of the crosses were regularly blown 10 to 20 feet away by the jet exhaust from the airport across the street and ended up against the fence. The self-appointed guardian would rebuild the broken crosses, zip tie the stuff back on them, and kind of kept watch over the site in general. Because he was there 10 to 12 hours a day for about 6 weeks total, he also became well known to the survivors and families. The guardian moved out to the county museum with the crosses. Because he was trusted by the survivors and was on several of the survivor Facebook pages, he became a conduit of information to and from the museum. Raging discussions online about how the museum was taking the crosses to attract visitors and make a lot of money were countered with real information, such as that the museum charges a whopping $2 per person, $1 if you're under 17 or over 55, and that they were mandated by the county commissioners to take the crosses. In addition, the museum aggressively refused to endorse or carry merchandise in the gift shop that might muddy that message. Other examples of online conspiracy theorizing were statements like, they're throwing everything away, or the museum will be an official memorial site for the crosses and they'll be on permanent exhibit. The other museums all kind of went, that they had escaped the brunt of the media, tourist and survivor attention because the publicity also followed the crosses to the county museum. The day the crosses were moved on November 4th began with a ceremony honoring Greg Zavis. He was introduced as, quote, the remarkable carpenter who makes the crosses, unquote. There were a fair number of analogies about carpenters and crosses and leaving the crosses there for 40 days. Well, really about 35, but who's counting on this? After the ceremony, the county maintenance workers began boxing up the crosses and related stuff. The care and reverence the workers felt was evident in this process. So that's kind of one of the top pieces there, the piece over in the corner that is about some of the conspiracy stuff on this. Once it got out to the museum, the registrar at the museum had organized a dozen volunteers at the museum to process the boxes by separating dying flowers, undoing the zip ties, removing stuff that had been stuck to the crosses. The crosses were carried to the outdoor amphitheater for display for another month out there. The volunteers talked about and exclaimed over ribbon lays, notes, and boots as they emptied one box into another one, and then that box, became the recipient objects for the next crosses box. As volunteers recognized a name and story from reading the newspaper, they shared it with other volunteers. It was clearly their own way of mourning, remembering, and valuing the victims. So, I think I got slightly ahead of myself. You can see the volunteers working on this, the placement of stuff, the lack of space that the museum's got and these boxes being stored elsewhere on the site on this. The public memorial sites are seen as a place of social grieving where the sacred and secular overlap. They also facilitate some particular kinds of consumerism. First, going to the memorial sites themselves or helping to catalog the memorabilia is a kind of pilgrimage where one is really just kind of overwhelmed by the sheer volume of stuff that is in this. Second, and you can kind of see this is more here. Second, a significant amount of money was spent overall buying trinkets and materials for do-it-yourself projects. Third, and perhaps most crass, were the people who did their souvenir shopping, it is Las Vegas, right, at the crosses. One example was a woman who was stopped by others who was casually strolling along the crosses picking up t-shirts and draping them over her arm, as one would do at a blowout sale at a souvenir shop. Once the stuff was at the museum, the process of cleaning, describing, measuring, photographing, numbering, bagging, and boxing each object began. It took 12 to 14 volunteers 2 days to accession about 400 objects. This gives you some idea of the time that's going to be involved in this massive collection of estimated 15 to 20,000 objects on this. I did one of these volunteers as part of my research on this. The mandate to preserve the October 1st artifacts came with no extra funding for materials or conservation, extra staff, nor increased storage. A new storage building has been requested for the last 14 years, but has never made it to the top of the county's priority list. Museum staff has made do in every way possible and continues to do so, and this is true of every museum in town that's involved in this. For instance, boxes of painted rocks have temporary homes under the credenza at the entrance to the museum's office building, as you can see here up at the top. Unused offices, since the staff was halved during the recession, are temporary storage rooms. Erica Doss's questions about the practical and ethical questions of underfunded institutions grappling with such enormous projects touches on the issues of the objects themselves, but doesn't begin to address issues of how museum workers, who normally choose their field to be anonymous and behind the scenes, end up dealing with survivors, tragedy tourists, and international media. Like other memorials, the Las Vegas one shared issues of people feeling like they wanted to do something. Families of victims commented that their loved ones' memories ultimately need to be more than a hastily made cross and tourist trinkets. They appreciated the outpouring of feeling embedded in the stuff that was left behind in the memorials, but recognized that it was as ephemeral as the trinkets themselves. Reed notes that the roadside memorials reflect changing views about public mourning and may also reflect the growing percentage of Americans without any religious affiliation. Thus, there's this sort of kind of vague spirituality that is extended to their religiosity and painted personalized rocks in the shape of a cross, where it's somewhere on this one, not on this one, sometimes must convey such feelings. Because the vast majority of contributions come from people with no personal connection to any of the victims, family and friends feel like they lose control of how their loved one is commemorated and of the mourning process overall. So the memorials serve as an antidote to helplessness for the people leaving the stuff, while reinforcing the helplessness of the victim's family and friends. Just as the museums have to balance their existing missions with the new onslaught of memorial objects, the welcome sign demonstrated the uneasy juxtaposition of conflicting messages. The temporary adaptive reuse of an existing tourist site served dual purposes simultaneously. On my first visit to the crosses, an Elvis impersonator in a white jumpsuit carrying a guitar was heading toward the line of people waiting to take their usual silly posturing pictures, perhaps with Elvis, at the sign. And there is a big, strong billboard above his head. I didn't do that on purpose. It was after I got home and looked at it and oh, that's great. In November, after the closing ceremony, the line for pictures reformed because it was in the space that they normally are in this. And you can see, the pictures with all the stuff around the Welcome to Las Vegas sign in the top one here and down below here. I saw a woman costumed as a Vegas showgirl through the legs of the sign, which were still surrounded by candles, flowers, and trinkets. This highlights the liminality between the sacred and the profane in this. We commemorate the dead, but Elvis still needs to make a living. Thanks. One of the other things I realized as I was putting this together is I've got 3 different Elvi in this, which was also not intentional, but worked well. Questions or comments?
I thought that, if you don't mind, these 2 papers are related on this. And so Joseph can do the rest of it.
Then we'll do the
after that.
Q&A afterwards?
Yeah.
Alright.
You were getting me.
See the two last names you said. Different.
So my name is Joseph Hall-Patton, Joe for short. I'm her son. Because of our mutual connection to the museum, we both decided we needed to separate what we were talking about. But I also run a YouTube channel called The Cynical Historian, because I do history. And something that has been rather troublesome on YouTube with surrounding this entire thing has been conspiracy theorizing. So I decided I'll do that. Alright, so, in the wake of such a tragedy as the Vegas shooting, our culture tends to follow particular tropes. As shown in the previous presentation, some handle their grief, anger, and confusion through memorials. These also control a narrative of tragedy. But there's another narrative which inevitably appears: mythology. Today, I'd like to briefly show how this has taken place before in Las Vegas, surrounding another horrific killer named Kehoe, as well as how this time contrasts. America has a tendency to mythologize major events, but this inclination has its own tragic consequences that need to be counteracted. The October 1st shooting took 58 people's lives and injured over 500 others, out of 22,000 people who were attending the concert. After the tragedy, people created memorials quite spontaneously. All of these artifacts were taken in by the Clark County Museum as part of the memorial collection, and were not organized in any official capacity, and were technically the legal equivalent of litter. These memorials told a story, even though, as one museum worker put it, don't expect it to make sense. It's going to be chaos. Just roll with it. This crazy quilt tells a story both of grief for the victims and anger towards the shooter. But others have sown their seeds of doubt. Within a day of the shooting, conspiracy theorists began telling their typical fictions. Reminiscent of JFK's assassination, theories center on a supposed second shooter. Others take it to a repugnant extent, conjuring up the same vicious falsehoods that they said about Sandy Hook being a hoax, saying that people were acting it out, or even contacting victims to make threats, saying that they were actors. We're seeing that right now, actually, with this recent shooting. We need to not debunk their myths here, for so many people have already done that. Instead, we should look at this as a pattern, which inexorably occurs with such tragedies and is worth inquiry. Unluckily for history, but luckily for the historian, there has been a prime example of this process taking place in southern Nevada before. Around the turn of the century, we experienced a spate of what were called renegade Indians. Most prominent of which was a serial killer by the name of Kehoe. He killed anywhere between 6 and 25 people between 1910 and 1919, and then quickly disappeared into the Mojave. Now, I would venture to say it's much closer to 25. Though he was never caught alive, his mummified remains were found in 1940. Mummified by just the desert. He had been killed by a rattlesnake, just probably about a year prior. The LA Times dubbed him the Mad Mummy. This is where Kehoe's legend took on celebrity status, because that became a attraction for Las Vegas. For 3 decades, the Elks Lodge held that, exactly that setup, that's how he was found, in their lodge as part of the Eldorado days, which was a mainstay. The Eldorado days went on between the 1950s and 60s, and he even supposedly hitchhiked with the mayor in an open car during one of these parades. Though I really want to find pictorial evidence of that. After the Elks got tired of this morbid exhibit, Kehoe floated around the valley, possibly being buried, strewn around the wash for the police to find, and eventually made it into the local university's collection. UNLV sold him to a Pahrump lawyer who quickly buried the remains under a poorly written gravestone just beyond Mountain Pass. You can still go and find it today. It's in Cathedral Canyon. So Kehoe had quite an afterlife, which in turn created its fair share of myths. By the 1950s, there were the typical rumors of buried treasure that inevitably mythologizes people who hide themselves away. There was even a TV show made in the 50s, going and seeing the exhibits and saying, like, where's the treasure? Of particular importance is a little-known myth maker, probably never heard of him, Harry Reid. In his amateur history of Searchlight, he portrayed Kehoe as a rebel, lashing out against the oppression of white people, seen as a kind of anti-hero by Reid's parents. Of course, no one bothered to say something like this during Kehoe's life. Most of the accounts talk about him as a kind of Hannibal at the gates. But this is inevitably the turn that myth-making takes surrounding famous killers. They become lionized through the use of an argument from silence, or in other words, told through the absence of evidence rather than with evidence. One historian has pushed this myth-making parable, a Robin Hood theory, if you will. Eric Hobsbawm romanticized such malicious characters as social bandits. These social bandits are said to be in a state of primitive rebellion, and he lists such examples as Joaquin Marietta, Jesse James, and Billy the Kid. All simply murderers, at least considering at the time, but if you talk to Hobsbawm, they were heroes. Kehoe was placed within this mythos by folks like Harry Reid. And with some accounts, we are already headed in that direction with this recent killer. Conspiracists are following a similar pattern, though they are blocked by the public mourning from outright lionizing the killer. Another historian has made a more cogent view of myth-making. Richard Slotkin says, the structuring metaphor of the American experience is a regeneration through violence. That's the title of his first book. Though it has gone through many permutations, the basic idea is that men conquer the wilderness, save the girl, and in the process, rejuvenate American civilization. Everything from Daniel Boone to the War on Terror can and has been mythologized in this way. Society is attracted to violence, and mythmakers use this to play politics. Historian Catherine Olmsted has argued this and furthers it. She shows that conspiracism has two sides to it, governmental and anti-governmental. Governmental conspiracism, such as Red Scares and domestic spying, bolster anti-governmental conspiracism. But they all play to a political purpose. The governmental conspiracism here came when ISIS took false credit for the killings, and politicians have in turn used that to fearmonger for the war on terror. Anti-governmental conspiracism is used to avoid the gun debate by blaming the government for the tragedy. We should be wary of this. Conspiracism has played a continual and violent part in history. As Slotkin clearly pointed to, mythologizing in the American mode necessarily creates an impetus to commit further violence. We have seen this play out in the past countless times. So, a few examples. In 1992, an ATF and FBI raid went badly at Ruby Ridge, Idaho. Leaving a child and the wife of the arrestee dead. 7 months later, some of the same ATF and FBI personnel participated in the Waco siege, which ended in the Branch Davidians being immolated. The family at Ruby Ridge and the Branch Davidians at Waco saw a conspiracy behind the ATF raids, so they resisted, but their deaths were not the end of this conspiracy theory arc. A couple of angry men got together believing that these were conspiracies perpetrated by the three-letter agencies against peaceful people. They created a massive bomb and blew it up in front of the Oklahoma City federal building, directly on the second anniversary of Waco. So this was built off of a conspiracy theory. Oddly enough, the person who was being arrested at Ruby Ridge was also a neo-Nazi. And at the risk of God-winning this, I should add that Nazism itself was fundamentally propelled by a conspiracy theory called the stab-in-the-back myth. These are only some of the most lurid examples. Conspiracism motivates violence in any number of ways that need to be further explored, just not here. Obviously, we need a good way of combating... God-winning. Obviously, we need a good way of combating this kind of myth-making. As Slotkin pointed out, it does not suffice to simply debunk conspiracy theories. We must create better narratives to supplant their stories and show their vile side. Now, as a YouTuber myself, this is where YouTube comes in. Conspiracism has a pretty easy way of showing how despicable it can be. They monetize their lives on YouTube. So they're actually making money off of this. But a bunch of news outlets got on top of that and started pointing out the problem. So YouTube has started making a more progressive policy, but not progressive enough. Demonetization became a particularly big problem around this event when Casey Neistat's charitable video on the subject was demonetized, despite media giants such as ABC, NBC, all of those still have monetized videos on the tragedy, so they're still making money on it. Even a documentary I made in August about Las Vegas history, before the event, obviously, was temporarily demonetized on my own channel. Yet, InfoWars is myopic garbage, really, is still monetized as of writing this. While YouTube accepts no responsibility for this, it tangentially does through its demonetization program. By allowing conspiracists to profit while demonetizing legitimate videos, they can incidentally value conspiracy theories over proper research. When we need a better narrative of these events to counteract conspiracism, a coherent history that places these events in context. Richard Maxwell Brown's work provides an excellent template for what can be done. His idea is finding a strain of violence throughout American history and looking at the overriding themes. This could be done with mass shootings, and there has been some work done on this. For instance, there is a possibility of showing that some of this violence is gendered, because there is a tangential connection to domestic violence. But it's very, very limited. I have footnotes for that. So some work, we need to do further work, because this needs to be counteracted. Those myth makers are conspiracists and have followed a pattern. Kehoe shows one way it has happened and how it might happen here. The spontaneous memorials narrative impedes the social banditry form, so myth makers turn to conspiracy theories. Slotkin and Olmsted give us a way of conceptualizing their movement. Ultimately, we have tools to combat conspiracy theories beyond simple debunking. Now the history profession simply needs to do what it does best: tell a good and accurate story.
I'm sure we have some questions now that Colleen and her son have done their presentation. It's so timely, it's so current. It's almost hard to talk. We had 2 students in Arizona, Tucson, who killed here. It was a 3rd one, so they all drove up, for the event. And so
of course, here in town, it seems like it's a big town with 2 million people in it, but it's still a small town in that we know individuals that were affected in it. We find new stories, individual friends who were there that we didn't know about. One of my students had was actually working the event as a way of coming in contact with Trump supporters and people wearing Confederate shirts to see alternate views, and just ended up being in the middle of this, working on a school assignment. So, so we have all kinds of ways, not including this, how much I get of this over the dinner table.
So the question is kind of bounces off both of you. I think the interesting point that Joseph made about the narrative that can be constructed from this is really powerful and important. One question I would have is, in terms of the collecting of actual physical material, how much of a narrative is there? To me, I'm a little bit mystified by why the museum is collecting and cataloging all this material, which is, as you stated, by law, essentially just trash. And what's the narrative that's there? A lot of it can be documented photographically, so why do you need to continue to preserve the objects? For historians, we tell stories through objects that we can interpret. I don't see any interpretation.
Well, let me tell you what I have been told. One, given their druthers, they would not be collecting the volume that they are collecting. But when your boss's 6 levels up says you're keeping everything, you do it. So it's following a mandate of the county commission in this. 2, what they think is going to be coming out, what they think they'll be able to do with this collection down the road is to be able to give a particular kind of interpretation of how Americans mourn such tragedies in the 2nd decade of the 21st century. there, and given on this, I didn't say it in it, but there's like a day or two after this happened, Orlando called the museums here in town. The 9/11 Museum has called. The Oklahoma City one has called. The Smithsonian has called. And they're like, welcome to the fold. You now get to be among us. But also carrying stuff forward from them on recommendations on what to do, how to think about it, how to organize things to be aware of in terms of it. I think the thing that surprised me the most on this was, like I said, I thought this was so weird, and anomalous. And the more I got into doing the research on impromptu memorials, I didn't include it in this, it's in my paper, like there's a list of 7 general properties of them, and this stuff meets all of them, and then another list of 5 or 6 other things that are just, people don't know this, and yet it's happening across the world in the same kind of ways.
Question for the husband, better than you, but there must be a conversation in the archival / museum world
Yes,
about this that's going on, about
AAM has sessions that are dealing with this. I'm assuming that archives do as well. When the museums got together, it is 5 different entities, including 3 museums, the archives at UNLV, and the Las Vegas News Bureau, and they've all taken different pieces of this for documentation and collecting on it. I didn't talk about the oral history project that the archives are doing as well. They're talking to each other, and they're talking to their respective organizations and other people that have been dealing with it, and there are special sessions at conferences and stuff on this as well. So yeah, they're talking to themselves, and when I put this together, I wanted to make sure I didn't step on any of the registrars and curators' toes doing this, because they've got plans on talking about it as well.
And you also have to think that, there's so many things that we collect now, thinking that it might not, it's just trash, right? But then 20 years down the line, I don't know what you do, but I know there's been plenty of times when I've been going into archives and looking at artifacts that should have been thrown away with that, but now it's gold to the historian.
And different museums are treating this differently. The museum, as I said, because of their mandate is taking everything or from that particular stuff, with some limits on how many candles do you really need, right? But other museums are being more selective in terms of it, because they don't have the mandate or the media attention that the kind of museums got. I mean, they've got volunteers that ended up on news shows in London. It's very kooky.
Are they afraid that things would get taken? There's that, right?
Well,
People, especially since last
at the time all the stuff where it was, the museum took the attitude that they had no control of the stuff while it was there. I mean, and in fact, a lot of stuff walked away. I didn't include in this that, for instance, many of the T-shirts, the cowboy hats, the cowboy boots, 4-foot-tall teddy bears, that the registrar was kind of haunting Instagram to see the pictures of what was going on and track how stuff moved around on it. But they couldn't do anything about it until they had physical custody of it when it actually landed on museum property. Even even the transportation piece there, which they had no control over. So it doesn't follow anything of what collections policies and curators would choose to do in the process of that, but they're doing what they can under the circumstances.
Thank you. Was interesting about mentally based shooting. So, is there any really conspiracy theory
that's viable?
Yes.
Do you want to talk about it?
I wouldn't say viable. It wouldn't be a conspiracy theory if it was. It would just be a theory. But the in terms of who did the shooting and it's pretty well known.
Yes.
Yeah, he appears to have been a lone operator. They got unlike what we've seen about Sutherland, unlike what we've seen about Parkland. For example, there's no history of anything where anything should have been caught. There isn't any place on that. He appears to have done it by himself. One other person has been arrested in the process of it but because he was a place illegal. Where he bought.
It was illegal dealing of armor-piercing ammo.
Yeah.
Maybe you were talking about this false flag type of conspiracy theory that didn't really happen, or
that's the typical conspiracy theory, and it's utter bunk.
I think I read recently that that's something that the Russian, disinformation group will put out there to cause.
Well, there's people who actually who make a living on YouTube, putting out conspiracy theories. It's kind of a niche industry. So, and we're not talking small sums. Like my channel, it makes maybe $300 to $500 a month, but these channels are raking in millions of views a day. I don't make even a percentage of that. So they're probably millionaires off of this. So they will keep on pushing it out. It doesn't need external impetus. It's its own industry.
Giving up my time, I'm doing my paper in the morning, I ask permission. It's just hard to do what I do. It doesn't fit in at all. I want to ask about the guns on the hotel. Is it Mythology?
Mm-hmm.
A guy was taking, from what I was reading, I read the Arizona and I watched the movie along. He was taking guns in and out for over a week. And they didn't, aren't there like things that follow you for photograph you if you walk in and out of hotel lobbies?
Well, it wasn't like he was open carrying. He had them in suitcases.
Also, if he was open carrying, he wouldn't be violating the law.
Yeah, we have open carry.
So literally, he could have just walked with all of these guns just piled on his back, and he wouldn't be breaking the law.
Really?
Yep.
Is that a lot of that open?
Yeah, although obviously casinos can set their own policies. It's private property, so they probably would stop you if you did it. But just like Walmart will, or any place that has those little decals that say it, because most states that have that, most public places will have something saying that. But he wasn't breaking the law.
And everything was legally obtained. You know, he didn't break a law.
Yeah.
When he went down to Arizona and bought the armor piercing stuff, the guy that did it didn't have the license to manufacture the bullets.
Yeah.
If I remember.
So he didn't have the license to manufacture armor piercing bullets, but he wasn't selling them as such. So Stephen Paddock technically wasn't breaking the law by buying. So at no point in this, until he started pulling the trigger, was he breaking the law.
Yeah, but he actually didn't use those bullets in it, as far as I know.
the hotel, I thought they took a picture. Everybody walked through the door, public places like that. But you say, whether
It's up to the hotel staff.
they couldn't do anything.
It's well, I mean, they could say no. I mean, it's private property, so they could technically do that. But the fact is, if he walks in and conceals it, what are they going to be able to do?
What they have documentation of is any number of suitcases that he carried up there, but they're suitcases, not something where you have to go through a metal detector to take stuff to a room. Right? So.
And the memorials, taking them on the museum, taking it away, right? That seems to be common. Our congresswoman was shot. Kathy Gifford, remember her?
Right.
She had which is really nice. She'd meet the public on a corner every couple of Sunday mornings, which is nice. And she was shot. They was more for her around the hospital.
Right.
Where she was until she got better enough to fly her to Texas. And people were beginning to take things. And if they swooped in like here, they gathered all the stuff and everything. But they have a real big deal now where they put them made a place to put those things that people. I took a picture of her and some flag, I just love her dearly. And so that's really weird. But they say certain items, flowers just don't hold out. But is this a law? The memorials that it doesn't belong to the public, it doesn't belong to the people?
It was placed on a median strip in the middle of the Las Vegas Strip.
Oh.
Okay, so that particular piece is on county land. It's not in the city of Las Vegas. The entire strip is actually county land, not city of Las Vegas land, which is why the county commissioners had jurisdiction over it. And typical of stuff like this, the initial one started about a mile farther north, closer to where the actual concert grounds were, but outside of the concert, around the concert grounds, and streets near that were blocked off with yellow police tape for about a month afterwards. So it was close to that, but still had public access. And then when Zanis placed the crosses, that redefined what became the unofficial place of mourning. And that site was closed down. That was the first batch of stuff that went out to the museum. They were bringing out a truckload and a van load of stuff twice a week on that. And, I talked about the crosses, but I've got pictures of all the other kind of stuff that was up and down and around at the sites there. And I don't know what happened to the other unofficial sites. I know there was an unofficial site at Mandalay Bay. It went to the State Museum. But there was other stuff up and down the strip for about the first week, because you walk by some of those. Mm-hmm. And by the time I got a chance to drive the strip, in terms of that, they were all gone. So.